this video, I'm going to talk about how I managed to catch nearly 100 points trading the NASDAQ today, and also how I managed to end the day green after starting the day pretty red. So let's get right into this video. So the first thing I want to point out is we are on the 4-hour chart here, but I want to go back to Friday's price action first and kind of analyze that. I like to identify any 4-hour fair value gaps anywhere in our chart. So the first one that I noticed here is this 4-hour CISD that we traded into Friday morning. Right, and then we also had this 4-hour fair value gap here, including this volume imbalance from the Friday overnight session. So those two fair value gaps were important for me to annotate going into trading on Monday. But kind of looking at Friday's price action, I do want to point some things out. So obviously we did sweep the previous day's liquidity on Friday, right? Thursday was a holiday, so Wednesday was a previous day, right? We swept that buy side liquidity and traded into this 4-hour CISD that I had annotated, right? And so that is essentially a model right there, right? Whenever we have a sweep of liquidity into a higher time frame array, in particular in this case, right? If we find a 4-hour array, we need to line it up with the 15-minute time frame. So in this case, because we had a 4-hour CISD, right? We also had this series of we have to find the series of up close candles that swept the liquidity. So in this case, it's these candles, right? From 8:30 a.m. to the opening. Those were the series of up close candles that swept this liquidity into the higher time frame array. So our change in state of delivery is once we close below those series of candles. So we had a change in state of delivery here once we closed here, right? Right, and ideally we would enter on a retest of this, targeting some sort of opposing liquidity. Right now, the market never quite returned to this. Right, this change in state of delivery, we never quite returned to it. However, it is still valid going into trading the next day. So that is something I was watching as a potential target for any longs I would be taking. So going into going into Monday, if we want to go back to our 4-hour chart, we can see here, we did have a gap down on Sunday, right? Sunday going into the session, we had a gap down, right? We had obviously the US, Israel, Iran, geopolitical stuff that's going on. So that, I'm sure had something to do with this significant gap down. But off of that gap down, the market did kind of rally going into the market open session, or New York open. So what I want to point out is going into that New York open, we did reclaim this 4-hour fair value gap as well as form this 4-hour fair value gap here, right? So for this reason, I was looking at any potential longs going into the session. So we had this 4-hour fair value gap here, all right? And so going into the 6 a.m. hour, the market did trade lower, right? We had this sell side liquidity that was resting here, right? Within this 4-hour CISD, BISI. So that is one thing I was watching for a potential long, right? Watching a sweep of liquidity and a change of state of delivery, right? Which would essentially be the series of down close candles that sweeps these lows into this 4-hour gap, right? The market comes lower here. We do ultimately end up sweeping this liquidity. The market comes higher. So our change of state of delivery would be here, right? That would be our change in state. So the market trades higher, and then we do ultimately close above that. And then the market comes back down and we do retest this change in state here, which is where I get my entry, right? Entering here off of this retest. I'm just going to get as close as I can. Market comes here. I enter here with my stop loss ultimately right below this low, right? Targeting this change in state of delivery, right? Ultimately, that was going to be my target on this trade. So the market done. We do retest it again. And then going into the market open, the market just literally dumps and takes out that liquidity here, and then ultimately comes back up and rips to the target immediately. So I ended up getting stopped out of this trade literally by a few points, and the market literally reclaimed this level perfectly. You can see how the bodies were respecting this change of state perfectly. Didn't inverse any fair value gaps. Perfect delivery all the way to the change of state of delivery here. Now at this point, I wasn't really, concerned. To me, it's just a matter of being patient and waiting for another opportunity. I did know that this change of state had still not been retested, so I was still looking for a potential entry opportunity here. However, this stop loss was way too big for my liking, right? Because obviously, in order to invalidate this, we have to be above the high, above that series of candles that swept that liquidity. Right. So in this case, this is a 145 point stop loss. And even if I was targeting here, that still is not, that's just too much risk for me. I'm not necessarily comfortable with that. So what I essentially did was drop down to the 1 minute. I very rarely use the 1 minute, but to get a more precise entry, I was watching for my model, right? A sweep of liquidity and a change of state of delivery on the 1 minute time frame. Why am I using the 1 minute? It's because this is a 15-minute higher time frame array. Right? This is a 15-minute order block that swept this liquidity into this 4-hour gap. So if I'm going to use a 15-minute order block, I need to pair that up with a 1 minute execution, right? So in this case, watching this, now I was just watching for the market to sweep some liquidity and ultimately have a change of state, right? So the market comes higher here, and then we kind of, consolidate, and then ultimately we do end up trading lower, right? And then the market comes back, right? And we end up sweeping this liquidity one more time here, right? So this was interesting to me, right? Once we swept this liquidity, I knew now, okay, the market could definitely try to make a move lower now that we've taken out some internal liquidity here, right? So now I'm essentially watching for the series of up close candles that swept this liquidity to get closed below. Where's that? That's these, right? This is the series of up close candles. This is not it. Why? Because this candle that swept the liquidity, these are the series of up close candles that swept it, right? So that's where we have to watch for that change of state. So the market does break below that. We get that change in state here, right? We get that change in state here, and that officially validates now I can look for a short opportunity with my stop loss now above this high, which is much more respectable. Now targeting some sort of array here, which in this case, I was looking to target this change in state here. This was actually a change of state here, right? Why? Because this is a series of candles that swept liquidity. We closed above it. So this was also a change of state. So I was watching to potentially target this for this trade. So about 100 points, hopping back to that one, you can see the market does come here, right? We retest that change of state. So I enter short here, stop loss above here, right? Targeting liquidity here, all right? And you can see the market, we do end up selling off, right? Market comes lower, we take this liquidity, come a little bit lower here, and then we rally back up, right? And although we rally back up, we do respect this change in state beautifully, right? We respect it. We come and sweep liquidity one more time. No need to panic here. As long as this stop loss is not, this high is not taken, this trade is still valid. We do end up sweeping liquidity one more time here, and then we ultimately get a close back below here, right at that 11:20 mark, which is actually a macro window. If you do play that 1 minute time frame, that's always a time window I like to potentially look at. I don't again, I very rarely trade the 1 minute, but in this case, I just wanted a more precise entry rather than just entering on this change in state with my stop loss having to be all the way up there. And then ultimately we do get some smooth delivery, right? And if I go back to the 15 minute, because that's pretty much what I was watching at this point, the market does respect. Also, I want to point out, it's important to mark your standard deviations, right? So in this case, the standard deviation is going to be your manipulation leg, right? So we want to mark out, where does this manipulation leg actually, where are the levels for this? All right, so I want to make this visible, extend these lines. So in this case, we had our -1 here. So that's when my stop loss went to break even. Once we hit -1 standard deviation, took out this liquidity. At this point, stop loss can go to break even. And we hit -2 here. You can see market respects it perfectly. All right, and at this point, it was just being patient and waiting for the market to kind of give you that delivery. All right, we're kind of playing around here, sweeping liquidity, but eventually, you know, into that afternoon hour, the market does begin to spool, and we ultimately end up taking out this liquidity here and hitting this target for a clean 100-point trade. So that literally recouped my entire loss from earlier plus more, which put me back green on the day. So that is why you have to be patient. That's why you can't FOMO into a trade after. I could have very well took this loss, seen this wick back up, and said, oh, I'm getting back in. Although that's not my setup, right? Just because if this sweeps this liquidity, the trade isn't validated. Just because this reclaimed it does not make this trade valid again, right? And if it would have came and retested this, I would have took another long, but we didn't retest this after we closed above it. We just kept going higher, which invalidated any longs. So now it's about being patient. I knew we still had this change in state from previous day. So just waiting for the market to trade up there and see how we react, dropping down to a lower time frame for a more precise execution and entry, and just being patient and executing. And you can see this trade literally dumped, right? We ended up sweeping that same low from earlier. So this ultimately ended up going over 200 points. This, had I held this, I mean, this would have been, you know, my biggest trade in this live account. So I am trading in a live account too. So this was, you know, real money I'm taking. I'm not taking prop firms, not demo trading. This is real money, margin account with a broker Optimus Futures. So that is ultimately how I ended up catching about 100 points today and recovered from a loss that I took. So that is why you have to be patient in this market. That's why you have to just wait for your setups to come to you. Don't force it. If you take a loss, don't panic. Wait for the next one. And even if that next one wasn't today, it's going to come tomorrow. You're going to recover it and it all will be good. So that's the trade I took today. That's ultimately what I'm looking for every single day. This is a great day of price action. Although I got stopped out earlier, still a great day. So that's pretty much all I got for y'all in this one. I will see y'all in the next one.